Okay, so recording has now begun. We'll get underway. So thank you for attending. This session is entitled Content Rules, the Beating Heart of an EDRMS. So there are three components to any modern EDRMS. You need a retention schedule, a software-ready retention schedule at that. You need a piece of record-keeping software, of which there are 5 choices for the SharePoint world. And then you need SharePoint as a repository. And the beating heart of that solution is what we'll be covering today. It keeps the blood flowing between the 3 pieces. Poor analogy, but very true. Okay, so first of all, let's concentrate on SharePoint itself and Purview. Now, SharePoint is your corporate repository, but I want to make one thing really clear. SharePoint does not manage records, and it never will. So let me repeat that, please. SharePoint does not manage records, and it never will. You need a third-party product. You need something else that manages the content inside SharePoint as records. And that can be Microsoft Purview or any one of the other 4. I just chose Purview as an example here, but it could be any one of the 5 products. And when you decide to use record-keeping software to apply to SharePoint, well, that colors everything. It changes the way that you deploy SharePoint. In fact, it will dictate the information architecture of SharePoint, which we'll cover a little bit later. The information architecture being, where do we store our documents? How many sites? What libraries do we have? What metadata do we need? That's called the IA, or information architecture. The presence of record keeping dictates what that information architecture must be in order for that record-keeping software to work. Okay? So let's get right down to business with this. What do I mean by compliance? Now, Microsoft is a big company, sells all around the world, and they have a different definition of compliance than I do, and that's perfectly healthy. Their definition of compliance, I liken it to a bowling ball. A bowling ball, if I'm not mistaken, is hollow. And inside that bowling ball is a golf ball. And that golf ball is the records component of Purview. It's just a component of Purview. So when Microsoft says compliance, they're referring to the bowling ball. They're talking about a lot more compliance than records management. So I'm focused exclusively on the golf ball inside, okay? But there's 3 things that compliance means, to me anyway. Number 1 is every document in SharePoint complies with the retention schedule. So if I have a document about expense reimbursement, then and the expense reimbursement is code 202-2 in the retention schedule, keep 3 years and destroy, then that document has code 202-2 assigned to it. If it's about fleet vehicle maintenance and the retention code is 707-7, and the rule is keep for 5 years after end of life of vehicle, that's fine. But either way, every document adheres to that retention schedule. Number 2 is all the documents are being managed as a record. Notice I never said is a record because I don't care if it is or not. All I care about is that it's being managed as a record, which means 3 things. Number 1, it's immutable. Neither the document nor its metadata can be altered by anybody. Number 2, it has been assigned a retention rule, a code representing its proper retention treatment in the retention schedule. And number 3 is that for 60% plus of all your records, there has to be an event-based trigger applied to it. So in other words, we've got to be looking after our event-based records properly. Number 3, and this is the ultimate litmus test, can you do a disposition? Well, in order to press one button and destroy or transfer millions of records in a heartbeat, no pun intended, you got to be confident that the accuracy of the classification is above 85%. In some industries, even higher. But 85 is a low bar, a minimum accuracy requirement. So I estimate, in my experience, that over 95% of all EDRMS projects in the world today fail on number 3. They cannot do a disposition. We need to avoid that. So The only way to avoid it, these are the 5 products on the right, is to use one of these products to automate it. So let's look at some numbers first. If we have 1,000 users, did you know that the average number of records per person per day in a modern EDRMS is 12? Where does that come from? 10 emails and 2 non-emails, total 12. So if you multiply that by 220 working days in a year, then you end up with 2.7 million records per year flowing into your system. So the number of records is not a static number, it's a flow rate, a daily flow rate. And if you think for a minute that you are going to check, investigate, do anything with those 12,000 a day, you're dreaming in Technicolor. It's not going to happen. You would need to go out and hire 25 full-time employees just to do that. Nobody can do that. In other words, the records person cannot touch those 12,000, cannot touch them. So what if we were to take one document and introduce to 10 of your users at random? This is what I think would happen. And I've done this. I ask them, is this a record? I get 10 different answers. I ask, is this temporary or sorry, how do I classify it against the retention schedule? Go do it. I'll get 10 different responses. If you try that, that's what you'll find. And that's no way to build an EDRMS. We can't depend on the users. So there's 2 schools of thought out there. One says compliance comes from end users. We all, as employees, we all have a corporate duty enshrined in policy to manage our documents as records, which means tell us what the record, which ones are records, and get them classified against the retention schedule, right? So they own that responsibility. The other school of thought says, wait a minute, we're crazy if we expect users to do that and get it right. No, compliance is something we impose on the end users against their will. If one user says, I think I want this document for 5 years, and another one says, no, I want it for 15 years, we need to come in and say, you're both wrong. The official rule is 10, so get over it. You don't like it? Tough. That's compliance that we impose on the end users. Totally different schools of thought. Which one works? The first one, which is we impose it. The other way around does not work. I've never seen it work in history, and I don't expect to in my lifetime. Now, so what is the conclusion from that? Well, the conclusion is that with 12,000 records a day, we can't touch those records, cannot do anything with them. Number 2, we can't rely on the users to classify them correctly. So where does that lead us? That leads us to automation. We have no choice. We must automate. And if we must automate, then we're going to have to use the automation capabilities of those 5 products, which is what this session is all about. Okay? Now, here's the problem, and this is why I came up with this session and gave it the name that I did. Every time I mention the word rule to a records manager, this is what we tend to think. We think, oh, you mean retention rules? No, I don't. No. Everybody thinks, well, I have a retention schedule with 220, 250 categories in it or activities, and each one with 1 or 2 retention rules. So I only have a couple of hundred retention rules. Well, you're right, but that's not what you need to pay attention to in an EDRMS, okay? There's another species of rules you got to know about. So there's retention rules and content rules. Retention rules are what you've been familiar with for 25 years. They're in your retention schedule and they're applied to business activities. Here's 3 examples on the slide here. Keep 5 years and delete. Keep 10 after end of life, then delete. Keep 25 and transfer to archives. Those are retention rules. That's not what this presentation is about. You need to understand content rules. They don't exist in your retention schedule, but they need to. They're in your record software. Whichever of these 5 products you buy, you've got to build these rules into that software. What do? They decide what retention rules to apply to what SharePoint content. And they don't fall out of the sky or come from flying saucers. You have to create them. It's a lot of work, okay? Now, there's a little lie going on in SharePoint, which is, and this has an impact on your content rules. The create date does not equal the document date. So if I download a PDF and it's 100 pages long and it's, say it came from the University of Texas website and it says clearly on the front cover, January 1st, 2010. Okay. And I download it and I put it in SharePoint. How old is that document? Well, the truth is that document is 16 years old. That's a fact that nobody, not even God, can change. But the minute I put it in SharePoint, SharePoint thinks it's 1 day old. So Purview calculates its age by taking today's date, subtracting the document's date from it, and that gives it its age. Then it compares the age to the retention period, and if it's older, it's marked for destruction or disposition. If it's younger, it keeps it. But guess what? That age calculation is based on the create date, which is a lie. The create date is really the date the document was put in SharePoint, right? So it gets that calculation wrong every single time. Is there a workaround for it? No. How big a problem is this? About a 5% problem. 5% of the time, it's a problem. But you might have to artificially elongate your retention schedule periods to compensate for that. More on that later. That's another presentation, another training session entirely. So first, we're going to talk about retention rules so that you can understand the difference between them and content rules. Now, here are retention rules. You're going to learn nothing new in here. It has three parts: a trigger, a retention period, and an action, disposition action, right? Here are three examples. I have an age-based trigger, which is the document's date plus a retention period and then an action, delete. Document date, 5 years, then delete. So that's an age-based retention. Here's a metadata-based trigger. The date the document was approved, then add 5 years, and then delete it. You can pick any metadata field you want to trigger the retention rule. And here's event-triggered retention rules. Employment termination, plus 10 years and delete. The event date is the date of employment termination, or the end of the audit, or the end of the project, or the end of the investigation, or what have you, right? So three different algorithms, blue, green, and gray, used by the software, but it's still a retention rule, just triggered three different ways, okay? Straightforward. Now here's some examples. Here are 15 business activities right here. Each one has a retention rule, and each retention rule is coded with a unique code, just so that we can tell one from another. There are 15 activities, but if you look carefully and you sort by the rule code, then you see that three of these activities, activities 1, 5, and 15, use the same retention rule. Whereas these activities, I think there's 5 of them, use rule number 2. So the conclusion is that there are only 5 retention rules. So there are 15 activities, but only 5 retention rules, right? The retention rules, think of it this way. They float in midair. They're suspended in midair. They don't do anything until you do something with them, right? So don't be fooled. If you have 250 activities, you don't have 250 retention rules. You probably have 50, right? Unique, because really what each unique retention rule is a permutation, a mix of the 3 elements, the trigger plus the period plus the action. Its unique mix is typically would be, I see typically between 50 and 100 at most, okay? This math, by the way, is important for you to understand. Now, let's look at a content rule. What the heck is a content rule? It tells you what content in SharePoint to apply a retention rule to. So there are 3 parts. It has a name, an alphabetic name. It has a condition that has to be met. What is the condition? The purpose of the condition is to specify this content in SharePoint. Not that content, but this particular content, these documents in SharePoint. That's met by a condition, okay? Part 3 is the retention rule, which is I've got my list of 50 or so retention rules suspended in midair, and I'm going to use this rule for this content. So you're basically matching the two up. Okay. Now, this is the beating heart of an EDRMS. Look at the heart there. I thought that was so cool. Anyway, uh, so you have these retention rules on the right, which are small, simple, straightforward. You could pound those into any one of the 5 products in an afternoon. It's no big deal, but they don't do anything for you. The software can do nothing until you create these things on the left, which are content rules. Okay? Now, there's 5 products on the market, and each one of them calls a content rule something different. In the case of Purview, they're called auto-apply policies. RecordPoint calls them patterns. Collabware calls them content rules. I thought that was the best name, so that's why I chose that name, because it's generic, right? It's a content rule. So here, let's go through this example here. We have a library in SharePoint called audits. Now that corresponds with an activity in the retention schedule called, guess what? Audits. So we have a library called audits, and there are, let's say 500 records in there. But one of them is magic. One of them is the final report. So there's a piece of metadata in that library called final report. It's a yes or no field. Only one document contains yes. It's the final report. You have to have a way to know that, right? So if in that library, final report equals yes, then we're going to apply this retention rule here called audits final report. So we go down, that's rule number 7, which is audits final report. Audit end date plus 10 years and destroy. Okay? Now, what about the other 499 records in that library? Well, they have final report equals no. They're not as important as the final report. So we're going to apply retention rule 5, comma, destroy, which is rule number 1, 5, comma, destroy, keep 5 years and destroy 5 years of age. So the trigger is the document's date, or in the case of Purview, create date, which is a lie. But nonetheless, it's still a time-based calculation. So that's audits. Now let's go into projects. Now projects typically have a lot of documents, a lot. And they have, oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, feel free to put any question in the chat. I'll keep the chat open and keep an eye on it. So we have here 4 possible values for the field document type: planning, technical, budgeting, and legal. Let's say there's 1,000 records in this project, 1,000 of them. Each one of them has document type equal to something. So here we have planning documents. The retention rule will be projects, comma 5, comma destroy, which is rule number 5, which says end of project plus 5 years and destroy. What if it's a technical document? Well, that's 25 and destroy. Keep 25 years and destroy. It has nothing to do with the end date of the project. We don't care. Similarly, budgeting, whoops, budgeting has 10 and destroy, and then legal has projects 5, destroy, project end date plus 5 and destroy. So it's quite a mixed bag. But what I want to point out is this, is in audits, we have 2 content rules that each use 1 retention rule each. In projects, we have 4 content rules that in this case are using 3 different retention rules because it's using the same retention rule, projects, comma 5, comma destroy, twice, once for planning and once for legal. So it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It doesn't need to be. Okay? I could go through the contracts one again, but it's the same idea. Okay? So this is how the software works. This is how all 5 products work. They can't work without these content rules. You have to build them. So here's something well worth memorizing or noting down. In a modern, healthy EDRMS project, the average number of content rules per library or activity is 3. Where do I get that number? From experience. When we build these projects, that's what it turns out to be. We have to write these rules. Typically is 3. There's no right and wrong number, but the average tends to be around 3. Okay? So this is the big missing secret. Now, what do we need to put in our retention schedule? Well, this screen catcher is an actual screen catcher of an actual retention schedule that I wrote. This is a typical modern software-ready retention schedule. And on the left, it has activities like any other retention schedule, control room operations, control room system, right? This is obviously from a water treatment plant. So if you look at control room operations, there are 2 rows in this spreadsheet, 2 rows. That's because there are 2 content rules. So the content rule is shown in yellow and the retention rule is shown in purple. So in this particular case, it has a field called continuous overwrite equals yes. Then it uses retention rule RRN1, which is last modified date plus 5 years and destroy. What the heck is continuous overwrite? It's a spreadsheet that people keep updating, like a tracking log. They constantly overwrite it. They don't replace it. They continuously replace it by pressing save, right? So when can you lock it down? You can't. When can you delete it? You can't. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a calculated risk and we're going to say, you know what? If you let 5 years go by and you don't touch that thing, we're going to go after it. That's what that first rule means. Now, what about if continuous overwrite is no, which is most of the documents in any library? Well, we're going to use true document date, that's the trigger, plus 5 years and destroy. Very plain Jane, very vanilla retention rule. Okay? So that's what it looks like in the retention schedule. Why does it have to be in the retention schedule? Because you're dealing with modern document management. You have all this metadata. So now the retention rules are more granular, right? And we have to deal with real world situations like spreadsheets and stuff. So is it more granular? Yes. Does the retention schedule have to contain the content rules? Yes, it does, because that's the modern retention rule. It's got metadata written all over it because for the first time in history, we now have metadata on our records. Isn't that great? So, so yes, your retention schedule does have to contain these content rules. And yes, there will be on average 3 per per category in the retention schedule. Okay, you have to come up with these things. Now, notice the language. It's plain, very plain. Anybody can understand this. Anybody, because you have to send your retention schedule to legal for review and approval from your leadership. There's no reason why anybody can't read these rules and understand them. No reason. Okay. I'll tell you why I'm telling you that in a minute, but that's an important distinction, believe it or not. Okay, now let's talk about the content rules again. Turns out that there are 2 types of content rules. Yeah, you've seen one type, which is in the retention schedule. That's what they look like in the retention schedule. This is what they look like in theory. This is what they look like in the retention schedule. They're vendor neutral. They're plain language. Anybody can read them. And this is the bonus. They're not limited by any software capabilities. In other words, those are the rules that we want. And it's aspirational. This is what we want. This is the behavior we want. Now you go out and you buy yourselves one of 5 software products. Guess what? They all are different. They all have different capabilities for their content rules. So you might be able to get away with some things in product A, but you cannot do it in product B or vice versa. So now you're getting into the software's internal content rules. So you have to translate from this, which is your vendor neutral English language, sign it and understand it rule to a product specific rule written in proprietary language. So you wrote these content rules up here. Now you got to do it again in the records software. It has to be very vendor specific. You might not get away with everything, but that doesn't matter because the retention schedule should never have to be changed, should never be beholden to any one product. Who cares if the product can do it or not? You can buy product A and then switch to product B or C years down the road and everything changes. Now you can get away with more. Some of the products, I would say all of them, improve year over year and they get more powerful, right? So retention schedule is your theoretical content rule. That's what you want. The software content rule is what you can get away with for that product that you purchased, okay? So these rules are the same rules, but they're now vendor specific and proprietary, okay? And trust me on this, there's a big gap between these 5 products, a very big gap, okay? Some of these products are 20 years old and they're highly, highly advanced. And oh my gosh, you can do so much in a content rule. It's wonderful. Some of the products, and I'll name Purview, are brand new to the market. They're weak and they cannot do much. Okay, so there's a big gap here. All right, so let's look at some of these content rules, shall we? This is Purview by Microsoft. Okay, now these up here is what you get in the file plan. This is your retention schedule. Okay, and this is just a look at the retention schedule. I'll show you the actual content rule in a minute, but these are what the retention rules looks like. And if you know Purview, you know that a retention rule or a category is actually not, it's called a label in SharePoint. But if you look at the names on the top, you see how different the language is from what we're used to. Now, this is what a proprietary content rule looks like inside Opus, to use an example. Look in green, rule container, object level, disposal class, content source, blah, blah, blah. There are almost, I couldn't even fit them all on the screen. There are 60 some odd characteristics of every content rule. Very sophisticated, right? Like leave a stub. The heck is a stub? And why would I leave one behind? All of these things are options you can do inside a content rule. Okay. Now, here's what an actual content rule looks like in Purview. And again, Microsoft calls their content rules auto apply policies. So you have to do this apply label. This up here, the top portion of the screen, is the wizards that you had to fill in. So I just tried to collapse it all into one small piece here. You apply a label, and remember, a label is a retention rule to content that contains specific words or phrases or properties. We want properties, not content that's unreliable. So you'll choose a label, a retention rule, to auto apply. The language is weird, but it's the same thing. We're going to write a content rule, and then we're going to pluck one of those retention rules, called a label here, and apply to it. So what does the rule itself, the content rule, look like? Here's one right here. I'm underlining it with my cursor right now. Refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 00 equals reports. This is a mini programming language called KQL, and it uses what we call refinable strings. I'm not going to teach you that today. That's another webinar, another course, but it's the same principle. We have the library, the operator, and the value. Library equals audits. We have column equals what? A column here would be approved equals yes, or reports in this case, whatever the heck we got going here. But you have to program it in this little mini programming language here. Okay. What does a content rule look like in Collabware? Well, you see these tabs? Look at this one in blue. Content rules. So once again, you see the same pattern emerging, right? You see SharePoint column equals department. The operator is equal to, and the value is administration, right? When you have that condition met, you apply a retention rule to that content. What about Gimmal, recently acquired by Moray? Same deal going on here. We have property equals value. The property, in this case, if it starts with @sp, it means it's a SharePoint property. So you click that, it brings up a list of SharePoint properties, which are metadata fields, otherwise known as columns in SharePoint, and the value, and then you can join different rules together, and then you assign the retention rule to it. So they call them classification rules or lifecycle rules. What about Opus? Well, Opus, it looks really complicated, but it's actually quite simple. It says apply term. What does that mean? A term is what they call a retention rule. So you define the term criteria. What's the criteria? It's the condition. It's the content rule on the left. If all of the following conditions are true, and each row here is a condition. They got a lot of different conditions because what they're trying to do with this screen is to show you what they're capable of, right? So here we have name, the column name, contains or could equal, like this example is the name column contains this word, or the column approved equals yes, or the column approved by matches the word Smith. And there's a plus sign between these three conditions, which means they all have to be true in order for that content to be marked with the term. Okay? So they have more examples up here. You'd never want to see this many. I would never want to see it. But when you're done, once you've got the term criteria laid out, you click this list right here, and it comes up with the term, which is your 50 to 100 unique retention rules. Okay? This shows what happens at the end of the disposition. So at the end, once all these conditions have been met, then you can do all of these different things with the records that were that met those criteria. Okay? So it looks different for every one of the products, but it's exactly the same thing. Exactly the same. A content rule is a bunch of conditions that specify content, and then it applies a retention rule from the list of retention rules to that content. Okay? So let's look at some numbers here. How many of these are you going to have to create? Well, I'm sticking by my guidance, which is 3 per activity. Now, how many activities or record series or categories do you have in your retention schedule? Well, in my experience, you have 1/3 too few. Okay? I find on average, we have to multiply every retention schedule presented to me by 3 to get the proper number of activities. But anyway, we're finding for an organization of 1,000 users, typically 800 categories. Yeah. What do you start out with? 250. Yeah. Why don't we just use big buckets? Because big buckets are gone. Those days are over. And I have another session, and oh, by the way, I have a YouTube video called The Death of Big Buckets, why they finally died. Okay? Watch it. Anyway, so we have 800 categories on average for a 1,000-person organization. That means you had to cook up 2,400 content rules. Yeah, 2,400. They don't fall out of the sky. They don't come from flying saucers. You have to create them, okay? Because your system is unique. It's bespoke to you. Your libraries are unique to you. Your metadata is unique to you. Nobody can invent these rules. They're unique to you. Okay, now, if you accept that, then 2,400, that's a lot. How long is it going to take me to write these rules? Well, if you haven't done it, you don't know. You have no clue how long this is going to take you. But I have done it many times with many pieces of software. and I'm going to give you two numbers that you can take to the bank. Okay? So this is my guidance right here. For a non-Purview product, 10 minutes per rule. For Purview, 20 minutes per rule. Now, I'm not going to put this in writing, but I'll verbalize it to you. The actual numbers that we have run into are twice that. But I'm being as conservative as I can possibly be here. Okay? Are there shortcuts? Yes. Are there tricks? Yes. But don't think for a minute that you can wholesale get away with this in an hour. You're dreaming in Technicolor. So we're going to go with 10 minutes per rule. So if I'm right, and you have to create 2,400 of them, you're looking at 50 days of work. And that's 8-hour days, assuming you don't go to the washroom, eat, or take breaks, or get sick, or take vacations. Okay? 50 days of effort. Double it for Purview. Why double it in Purview? Because Purview is just so complex. Again, we have like 30 training courses on Purview. God knows how many webinars, but we'll show you why it takes twice as long. Okay? So that's the effort level that you're looking at. Think of it this way. It's a once in a lifetime investment in making that software work. So if anybody tells me, yeah, they bought Collabware and they were up and running in 2 days, I just laugh and I say, you have no idea what you're doing with that software, do you? Right? No idea. There's no way the software can work without those content rules. So this shows the 6 steps that you must go through for any EDRMS project, no matter what software you purchase. First, you have to take your retention schedule and smash it with a hammer. Then generate a new one from it that's machine readable, product specific. That can take you a year normally. Then you have to get that retention schedule once you've got it and load it into your software. That should take less than a day. It should take less than a day. Step 4 is what are you going to do with SharePoint? Where are our records going to go? We call that the IA, the SharePoint Information Architecture. In my example, for 1,000 users, that means we have 800 categories in the retention schedule, which means 800 libraries, 800 content types, and an average of 14 columns per library for a healthy EDRMS, which means 11,200 column mappings, term lists in a term store, etc. That I've seen people take 2 years to build that. Okay.
What do you think?
Sorry. Number 5. Number 5 is once you've got it defined, and we do this in a spreadsheet. Okay. It's a spreadsheet that ain't New York. It's got 11,200 rows in it, but it tells you exactly how to build SharePoint so that the software can operate because you've got to have these 2,400 rules running 24/7. Yes? Now, then you have to deploy it in SharePoint. Build those 800 sites, build those 800 content types, build or create those 11,200 columns. There's another year to 2 years right there, right? And guess what? We haven't touched or created a single content rule yet because you cannot. Why not? Because the content rules contain, guess what? Library names and column names. You can't create the rules. The software won't let you create them until the metadata exists and the libraries exist. So you have to build out your SharePoint first before you create the content rules. So it's the last thing you do, the very last thing. Now, we've been doing this for a better part of a decade. We found we were doing the same things over and over and over again. So we came up with a new set of tools called Catalyst that completely automates number 5, takes it right off the table. And we also have, for certain industries, mostly municipal, but we also have out-of-the-box retention schedules fully machine readable. And for any industry, usually about 50% of what they need. So we now have a pool of retention schedule activities that we can use to shorten step four, or sorry, shorten step two a lot, from years down to weeks. This we've eliminated down to practically zero. It's not totally zero, but down to a couple days or so. And you still have to create those 2400 content rules. There's no way around that. But in a future version of Catalyst, we're now going to generate those as well. That's what we're working on now. So that's going to go away as well. So the whole 6-step process, uh, we're looking at ways to shorten it, and we shortened it from anywhere from 2 to 3 years down to 2 or 3 months, and we're soon going to have it down to 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so that's where we're headed with Catalyst. But either way, my message to you is that you've got to build these rules, hook or by crook, one way or the other, in order to use the software. So this is my summary, and then I'll open it up for questions. Number one is you got to realize these what they are, and you can't work without them. You have to build these content rules. You're going to need a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
them. Don't think that you can get away with one or two of these things.
Baby.
It's not going to
Hi,
happen.
baby.
Okay?
Yeah, what do you think? You want some cat food?
Not me. But if I see who that is, I can mute.
It's a Goldie D there, Bruce, up at the top bar. Maybe just want to mute that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I gave you share. I didn't. I forgot to make you a co-host, Steve.
That's okay. You're gonna have to mute yourself.
Not when I give you a co-host. Now you're a co-host. You go do it. Okay. Now, for content rules, don't think that you can create 3 or 4 of them. I once called up a customer of one of those 5 products, and I said, "How many content rules do you have?" And he said, 2 or 3. And I knew right then and there that this was not a real EDRMS project. It cannot possibly be, right? Number 3 is please don't think that you can do this in an afternoon. Don't even think about it, especially if you go with Purview. You got to be prepared to invest big time in writing these content rules. They don't come overnight. I was telling a person before we started the session today that when I train people how to write content rules, I allocate 51 days of training on how to do this. Oh, sorry, 51 hours. 51 hours of training. That's a lot of training. And the final point is you cannot do this work until after the information architecture is finished. So you got to have all your SharePoint squared away exactly the way you need it, and only then can you sit down and start writing your content rules, okay? So that's it. I'm going to throw it open for any questions. No questions? That's good. Or bad, who
Bruce,
knows?
I'm really happy to hear that you're going to put this up on YouTube.
Yeah, tomorrow actually. Maybe even
Yeah.
tonight. Definitely. Every webinar I do is going to be is already they all appear on YouTube. There's about half a dozen of them so far,
Mhm.
and many more to come. Many more to come. Anybody have any questions? Remember, we do this every day, so we know every little detail about what this is involved in this. No? Okay, well, I'll end it there. And thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. Be sure to watch for future webinars and YouTube videos. Thank you again, everybody. Bobby Bishop, haven't seen you in ages.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I think fondly to our dinners after the Army events.